Welcome to our Algodoo model. My name's Adam, and I'm a junior.
Hey, my name is Ben, and I am a sophomore.
My name is Taylor, and I'm a sophomore.
And my name is Alex, and I'm a junior in Professor Fair's class. All right. The objective of our project is to use Algodoo to study the conservation of mechanical energy during a head-on collision between two carts. Our group was particularly interested in the collisions lab from earlier in the semester, so we chose to create a similar model in Algodoo. However, whereas the head-on collision in the collision lab was elastic, after manipulating different properties of the system, we found the most interesting results by making the system inelastic. More specifically, we will manipulate the properties of density, friction, and velocity of the carts in order to observe how they influence conservation of kinetic energy for the individual carts and the mechanical energy of the entire system.
Awesome. All right, so I'm gonna pull up the Algodoo right now, and you guys should be able to see. So here we have our two carts, and they are of equal size, equal mass, made of the same material. In fact, they're exact copies of one another. And pretty much we modeled our the carts from the lab as these rectangles with these two wheels that have axles on them, and in these axles are motors, and that is the mechanism by which the carts move. It's a very easy system to interact with. You use your keyboard to make the carts move. It's as simple as setting or pressing the up arrow to move the carts forward or towards one another. And then you press the down arrow to move the carts away from each other. Both carts are controlled by the same button, and it's easy to simulate a collision where the velocities are equal, and like we were saying before, the masses are equal. It is two equal carts, and they're on a frictionless surface. So actually, to get the motion of the carts going, you have to start with a little bit of friction. As you can see earlier, I added friction because without the friction, the carts would not be able to start. So you start it, you give them a little bit of velocity. Here we're doing 6.3 meters per second. After that, we're just going to go over here to the friction of the plane and of the carts. We'll return to 0, and we are ready to go.
So each cart has the velocity vector of equal magnitude in front of it, showing that they are approaching each other at the same speed. You might notice that the vectors keep their magnitudes as they move. This is the case due to one of the features of our model, which is getting rid of air resistance. By neglecting air resistance, we're able to better study the actual collision in an isolated system without worrying about the complicated concepts and effects that come into play with air resistance. We will explain the implications of this limitation later, but it is what enables the constant velocity that keeps our model consistent. Above the carts, we have 3 plots. The one in the center models the total energy of the system. The one on the left models the kinetic energy of the cart on the left, which we will call cart A. And the one on the right models the kinetic energy of the cart on the right, which we'll call cart B.
Okay. When you press play, you can see the carts approach one another, collide mostly inelastically, and then move in the direction opposite from where they were initially going. The plot in the center indicates the total energy of the system decreases to around 40% of the initial energy. The plots on the left and right display how kinetic energy of the carts both decreased by similar proportions. We can reset our models by clicking the back arrow. For these next runs, we will manipulate different properties of the system, each of which teaches about an aspect of inelastic collision.
Prior to starting the next run, we will increase the density of the carts. We will do this to better understand how the mass of the carts influences the kinetic energy for the carts in the system. As you can see, when we change the density of the carts, the same initial energy of the carts in the system is higher than our initial density. Additionally, the final energy is higher than the initial conditions. However, the proportion of energy that is lost between the carts in the collision is the same, at around 40%, which makes sense because mass is directly proportional to kinetic energy. Next, we will increase the velocity in order to better understand its impact on the conservation of kinetic energy. To increase velocity, we're going back to how velocity was set before, but now making velocities twice as large as they were before. We did so by modifying velocity directly in Algodoo. As you can see, both the original total energy and kinetic energy increase proportionally with the square of the velocity, which is as expected with the kinetic energy formula. The proportional decrease in energy also followed a similar square relationship.
Now, we will change the coefficient of friction of each cart in their collision with one another to see how that impacts the conservation of energy and proportion of mechanical energy lost. Based on our knowledge of friction, we expected that as friction increased, more energy would be lost in the collision. However, we observed a phenomenon that shocked us. Here's a collision with no friction at all between the carts. Notice how much energy is lost. Next, here's the collision with the coefficient of friction of 1 between the carts. Notice that the amount of energy lost increases, as expected. Lastly, here's the collision with the coefficient of friction of 10. Notice that the amount of energy lost is greater than the collision with no friction, but less than that of the collision with a smaller coefficient of friction, such as 1. This result goes against all that we expected to see in regards to friction and its role in conservation of energy.
So this experiment has revealed that increasing the coefficient of friction to extremely large numbers changes the very nature of the collision, even in such a brief moment of contact. Previous interactions saw each cart leave the collision with the same speed, but this new interaction seems to be fundamentally different. And whereas we believed that increasing friction would always lead to lower and lower final energy values and greater drops in energy, these big values of friction really changed everything. And we really don't know how to explain that. But this result displays what we find so captivating about physics, and that even when you feel like you have a grip of the basics and understand the general nature of a concept, there are constantly new situations that make you rethink what you thought you knew. So this project, while reinforcing and building on our knowledge of collisions in terms of the relationships we saw with mass and velocity, it revealed to us the many potential complexities that we do not understand with this topic. It's also worth noting that while Algodoo is an excellent resource to study physical relationships, it is a virtual model, and like all models, it has limitations. One of the limitations is that air resistance, which is an external force, wasn't taken into account. So this enables us to only take into account the variables of the system that we manipulated, while not having to consider things like air resistance that play a part in the real world, but aren't important to the nature of the collision that we were trying to study. Another limitation is that our model doesn't take into account is the mechanical energy that would be lost in the forms of heat and sound. We're not really sure exactly where the energy is lost here. We just know that it, broadly speaking, it is lost. And then back on the idea of this coefficient of friction that so shocked us. While like coefficient of frictions of 4 might not actually exist in the real world, Algodoo is this like program that facilitates our exploration of physics in the real world, and it might actually give us capabilities that go beyond what can be done in the lab or that can be predicted. But either way, it gives us ways to explore and better understand the physical universe. So either way, we're really learning something valuable from this exploration that really goes beyond what we thought was possible or what we thought made sense. So yeah, thanks so much for giving us this opportunity to explore, and we hope you guys enjoyed.